When we hear the word serial killer, the images that come to mind are chilling, often shaped by news stories, documentaries, or even fictional portrayals. But what truly goes on inside the mind of a serial killer? What drives a person to commit such horrifying acts repeatedly? Understanding the psychology of serial killers is not only fascinating, but also disturbing, because it forces us to confront the darkest sides of human behavior. These individuals are not just people who kill, they are people who kill multiple times, often following a pattern with motives that go far beyond survival or simple anger. Their actions raise deep questions about human nature, morality, and the fragile line between sanity and madness. Psychologists and criminologists have studied serial killers for decades, searching for patterns in their minds and lives. One of the most striking findings is that many of them display traits of what we call psychopathy. A psychopath is someone who lacks empathy, feels little or no remorse, and is highly manipulative. They can mimic emotions, but they do not feel them in the same way most people do. For a serial killer, this lack of empathy means they can take a life without feeling the crushing weight of guilt that would haunt an ordinary person. Some even describe the act of killing as thrilling, addictive, or necessary to feel powerful. The absence of moral breaks in their minds allows them to cross lines that most of us could never imagine crossing. Another important factor is childhood experience. While not every serial killer has a traumatic past, many share stories of abuse, neglect, or violence during their formative years. A child who grows up in an environment of physical abuse, humiliation, or sexual trauma may develop deep psychological scars. Some of them retreat inward, creating violent fantasies as a form of escape. Over time, these fantasies can grow stronger, feeding a dangerous obsession that may one day spill over into reality. The fantasy world becomes more appealing than the real world, and when they finally act on these urges, the act of murder becomes a way of making those fantasies come alive. But it isn't only about trauma. The minds of serial killers are often complex mixes of biology, psychology, and environment. Research has shown that some killers have abnormalities in their brain structures, particularly in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, areas involved in controlling emotions and impulses. These brain differences may make them less sensitive to fear or more likely to act on violent urges. Combined with social influences and personal experiences, these biological differences can create a dangerous cocktail. It is almost as if their brains are wired to experience the world in a way that strips away the natural barriers against cruelty. Motives also vary among serial killers. Some kill for lust, driven by sexual gratification tied to violence. Others kill for power, wanting to dominate or control their victims. Some are motivated by a twisted sense of mission, believing they are cleansing society or carrying out a higher purpose. And then there are thrill killers who commit murder simply because it excites them, giving them a rush of adrenaline and a sense of control over life and death. The disturbing part is that these motives often mix together, making it nearly impossible to neatly categorize any one killer. Each case is unique, and each mind operates with its own blend of fantasy, compulsion, and cold calculation. What makes serial killers particularly chilling is their ability to hide in plain sight. Many of them are not the monsters you might imagine from horror films. They often live seemingly normal lives, holding jobs, raising families, and blending into their communities. Ted Bundy, for instance, was considered charming and intelligent, often using his charisma to lure victims. John Wayne Gacy worked as a clown at children's parties while secretly murdering young men. This ability to appear normal is part of what makes them so dangerous. It also highlights a psychological trait common among them: manipulation. They study people, exploit weaknesses, and carefully plan their moves, sometimes over years. There is also the question of compulsion. For many serial killers, killing becomes like an addiction. The first murder may be clumsy, chaotic, even accidental, but afterward, the memory of it lingers, feeding their fantasies. Soon, the urge to repeat the act becomes overwhelming. Each murder temporarily satisfies them, but it never lasts. The cycle begins again, often escalating in violence and frequency. This is why serial killers rarely stop on their own. The psychological drive is too powerful. It takes capture, death, or some form of intervention to break the cycle. Society's fascination with serial killers also plays a role in their psychology. Some killers are motivated by the attention they receive. They enjoy seeing their crimes on the news, reading about themselves in the papers, or even communicating with law enforcement to taunt them. This cat-and-mouse game gives them a sense of superiority, as if they are always one step ahead. The infamy becomes part of their identity, feeding their ego and pushing them further. In a twisted way, the spotlight validates their existence. Yet not all serial killers fit the same mold. Some are highly organized, planning every detail of their crimes, choosing victims carefully, and covering their tracks meticulously. Others are disorganized, acting impulsively, leaving behind evidence, and making reckless mistakes. These differences give criminologists insight into their psychological states. An organized killer often has higher intelligence and stronger control over their impulses, while a disorganized killer may struggle with mental illness or lack of social skills. Both, however, share the chilling disregard for human life. In trying to understand serial killers, psychologists have also looked at the role of fantasy. For many, the fantasy world is where it begins and where it continues to thrive. They imagine scenarios of control, violence, or domination long before they act. The crime itself is often less important than the fantasy leading up to it and the memory afterward. It is in this mental space that they feel powerful, alive, and in control. When reality no longer satisfies these fantasies, they escalate, seeking more extreme acts to fulfill their inner cravings. Ultimately, the psychology of serial killers reveals both the fragility and complexity of the human mind. It shows us how trauma, biology, and environment can combine to produce unimaginable outcomes. It forces us to question how much of human behavior is shaped by choice and how much is shaped by forces beyond control. Serial killers are not just criminals. They are individuals who expose the darkest capacities of humanity. And while studying them may terrify us, it also helps society understand warning signs, improve criminal profiling, and perhaps prevent future tragedies. So, what goes on in the minds of serial killers? It is a storm of emptiness and obsession, of cold logic mixed with uncontrollable urges. They live in a world where human life has lost its meaning, where fantasy outweighs reality, and where killing becomes not only possible but irresistible. They are reminders of how fragile the line between normalcy and monstrosity can be. And while most of us will never truly grasp the inner world of a serial killer, studying it brings us closer to understanding the darkest corners of the human condition.